Can anybody else relate to this?
I got something to say.
Oh, you can. Okay. There you go, sir.
Hello, my name is Dennis Gable. I also work for Dorm Room Movers. I'm the marketing manager, and my story is wild. The idea of fitting in versus belonging is something that is extremely powerful to consider. By a show of hands, how many of you believe that you get to authentically live out the life that you are choosing to live? A couple of us. Yeah, shit sucks. Most of us get to walk through life only hoping to be seen, only hoping to have our voices heard, only hoping that somebody will give us a chance to do something we're really actually great at. And then we grow up, and we find ourselves in jobs and careers with opportunities, bills, kids, breakups, mortgages, and all of that hope and piss and vinegar that we had when we were young lays to rest under a headstone that said, "This should have been." And we don't really find ourselves after that. I think the role that you hold, and mind you, I never really went to college. I did 2 years at an art school when I was 32. That's the bulk of my education. I'm traditionally uneducated. I didn't really learn how to use a comma until I was 26 years old, and it was because my friends just kept making fun of me. When I say that I'm not traditionally educated, I didn't do well in the system. I'm loud. I'm a bit overwhelming. Most people have told me that I'm too much most of my life. So the traditional education system didn't serve me. And so the idea of college showed up, and I was like, I'll go to community college. That lasted 2 whole weeks. I dropped out, and I was a musician for a handful of years and tried my very best to pave a life that I wanted to create. But being unheard and unseen is a gigantic part of my story. And so with my experience not being in your shoes and not even ever living in a dorm or being a part of residential life or having the college experience, what I can tell you is what Darnell said earlier, the opportunity to give a kid who may not look like the right kid on paper a chance could change their entire life. This is not just about your job and your role in your campus. This is about your opportunity to truly be leaders and lead young people into a life that they weren't going to have if you didn't give them a shot. And so there's a heavy burden that we bear when we think about who humans are. Who are these young people? Why does this young 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old kid act like such a jackass all the time? Why? Most of us, even the most rebellious of us, I speak from that club. I think I'm one of the leaders of the club, to be fair. We're just doing the best we can with what we've been given to work with. And sometimes we're doing the best we can with what we're creating and cultivating out of our own story. And the thing that is the most challenging for you is that you don't get to know those details most of the time. Mm-hmm. You don't know the home life of these young men and women. You don't know the home life of the kids coming into your campus just wanting to change the story that was written for them. I'm very grateful to be a part of a parenting generation where parents actually seem to give a real shit. My child will not have the experience that I had. That is for sure. However, people didn't ask me why I was the way I was. And what I never got to explain was that my dad was a heroin addict. And my mom took as much speed as she could get, like she was on a racetrack. I grew up in bars. I grew up around adults who didn't have the respect for me or themselves to give me a solid idea of what to become. I'm the product of divorce. I'm the product of abandonment. When I was 11 years old, as a quick story, my mom thought that it was more important to go to the bar and party than to actually come home and take care of her child. So I'm really good at cooking macaroni and cheese, in case anybody's curious. But that was months of seeing my mom just in the morning, where she would go out after work, I would come home, I would make myself dinner, put myself to sleep, and she would be able to do enough drugs to get up and go to work the next day and then do it over and over and over. Nobody was asking me why I couldn't keep myself together. Nobody was asking me, Dennis, why do you want all of the attention? Because inside of myself I was screaming, nobody sees me! And so I acted like a fool. So if you were to put how I behaved versus who I've become, my story would make zero sense to you. And I'm grateful for an opportunity to share a small part of my story with a group of humans that I never even got to interact with. I never even got to interact with humans like you. In places of leadership, at a college or university, where people are pursuing education. And so what I hope that you take from this little bit of my story is an opportunity to ask a kid why. You see leadership traits in these young people, regardless of what their resume says, regardless of how well written their cover letter was, regardless of whether they were privileged enough to go to a school that fed them into your college or university, or whether they were privileged enough to have parents who could afford certain things that they get to do. There's going to be a kid that you look into their eyes and you see who they are. Holding back tears, pause. Don't let that human go. Please. The difference that you can make by seeing somebody and allowing them to belong versus forcing them to fit in will not only be a saving grace for who they become as an adult, potentially, but I would challenge you that it will also heal the parts of you that you've been screaming to want to be seen. One of the most impactful things about being a parent for me is that I get to see the young version of me in my wild-ass 10-year-old son. And everything that I tell him, knock that shit off, stop doing that, be quiet, don't, is me yelling at my young self. Because for so many years I was told to shut up and sit down and stop dancing and stop trying to be funny and stop and stop and stop. And so I just had this built-in mechanism to go, bro, knock it off. And the more that I was willing to see myself in my son, the less I've been willing to do that. And the more I'm able to say, act like an idiot. It's okay. Scream, yell, be loud. It's fine. Everybody will live. Whether you have children or don't, you hold a role where you can heal a part of your child self, which heals a part of our adult self. The only way that we get to choose who we become in this life is to step into it. And the more that we try to fit in versus being willing to accept our belonging, the harder it becomes. And the older we get, the more grumpy we get about it, let me tell you. Because it's job after job and person after person and friend after friend and relationship after relationship of just all of us being the 9-year-old version of ourselves saying, will somebody please just see me for what I am? I'm grateful for the life that I've been willing to cultivate. Willing is the correct word. I learned this skill when I was 17 years old. I had a teacher, I took a public speaking class because I was like, this is going to be easy, I talk a lot. And my public speaking teacher put me to the test because he looked in my eyes and he saw what I knew, what I didn't know was there. And he pushed me and it pissed me off and I hated him so bad during that class. I've been able to speak in front of literally hundreds of thousands of people over the course of my life. I'm surprisingly articulate for being an uneducated kid who comes from West Phoenix, who didn't have the attention, who found himself in detention more than he found himself on any sort of honor roll, that's for damn sure. I graduated high school with a 2.4 GPA. Those don't get you into college, just in case you're curious. Everything that I've been willing to learn is because I've had certain people in my life look me in the eyes and see that part of me that nobody else was willing to see. The primary person to ever do that, though, was myself. Over and over and over. But if I didn't have Mr. Taylor, who was my senior English teacher, put my senior paper down in front of me and said, I hate so much when people do fast but good work. And it had an A-, which pushed my grade to a D so that I could graduate. He knew that there was something that I couldn't share. Be aware of these students. Be aware of these humans. Be aware that it might be you. One of the topics I discuss a lot. If you're ever unfortunate enough to find me on Instagram, you'll see that I talk about this topic quite a bit. Vulnerability and the ability to understand self-knowing are the topics that I talk about a lot. Let me assure you, it is painful as shit to stare yourself in the face. Especially if you've had an upbringing where people just tell you how shitty you are all the time. Pardon my language, it's just part of who I am. I'm actually not sorry. I hope you're all adults. When you have people telling you how shitty you are all the time, you believe it because you don't have a choice. Finding inside of yourself the silver lining, the rose, the piece of gold, the diamond that sits inside of you is a you job. And I would encourage all of you to travel that journey. Just ask yourself very simple questions. Why did I do that dumbass thing? Why was I mean to that person? Why did I not, I'm going to take this back to topic, why did I not select that kid? I really liked that kid. Why did I do that? Why did I make that decision? When I started, I asked how many of us feel like they get to authentically live out their own life. And not very many of us raised our hands. If you allow yourself to start doing that, you'll allow kids, students, they're not children anymore, to do that as well. Take a risk on somebody this year. One. Just take a risk on one. And it might bite you in the ass. But take a risk on one. Look that student in the eyes. See the human inside of them. Give them an opportunity to explain why they didn't make the grade. Why they didn't have the ability to write the resume the correct way. Why they didn't know how to interview. Their answers may shock you. Nobody would have ever guessed, still to this day. People assume that I come from some uppity Brady Bunch ass family. And that is not what I come from. Between my ability to be articulate and the color of my skin, people just assume that privilege was handed to me. And if I told you all of the details of my story, you would understand that privilege is not handed out sometimes. No matter where we come from, no matter what we look like, some of us have to fight to become who we are supposed to be. We have to fight to take hold of that royalty, that beauty, that king or queen, that thing inside of us that sometimes only we know exists. And so give somebody that opportunity, please. 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 We're going to take some time for questions. You've been able to text in questions if there's something like wild that you don't want to raise your hand and ask. I assume most of you are relatively audacious, but in the case that you don't want to raise your hand and ask the question, there's an opportunity for you to text in questions. Chelsea's going to be our moderator. But we would love for you to ask us hard questions. Darnell didn't even get an opportunity to share parts of his personal story, which are beautiful. This is one of the most beautiful humans I've ever known. Not just because he's handsome as shit, but because of his story. The amount of adversity that this man has had to overcome is fucking bananas. And if you get an opportunity to meet and speak with him, you'll learn that. So, I say that to say that, like, we had a lot of fun being able to do this. Like, we are not two peas in a pod. We're very different humans from very different backgrounds. We have similar outlooks on life. And that's the bond that we carry. We both deeply believe in the value of humans, no matter where you come from or who you are or who you love or what you look like. And so that is the bond that ties us, and the details of our story has been able to do that too. So, everything's on the table. Don't be afraid to ask whatever question you're like, oh man, could I ask that? Should I ask that? Just ask it. And if you're too afraid, text Chelsea and she'll tell us. Are there any questions?